we're so lucky to have you offer us a little
Sure.
bit of your time to talk to us about. So, what happens now, right as we're getting to the
Sure.
end of bills being passed? Some are put behind the budget. We're going to do this little flow thing that people
Sure.
don't quite get.
Slow
So,
motion.
so we want you to educate us, and in the process, we'll be educating
Sure.
folks who follow this podcast.
All right. Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to talk to your listeners and your viewers and your followers. Thank you also for your advocacy. When I see you all down here, it reminds us that there are people who want to put a face to policy, and we're grateful for that. The process that starts at the first gavel of session and ends with the last gavel of session oftentimes takes various twists and turns. And one of those is what happens the last 3 to 4 weeks of session. Normally, the first few weeks of session, we're organizing and bills are being sponsored, and members are getting really ready to introduce legislation and seeing what support they can give. Then you have that middle section where bills are starting to move from subcommittee to full committee. Bills are moving from full committee if they have a fiscal note, meaning they have a financial impact upon the state. They'll go to Finance, Ways and Means. If they are not having that impact, they'll go to Calendar and Rules and to the House floor. And that's why you may see the first few weeks or a month of session there's not that much activity seemingly in committees because bills are being written but also amended. If there's something that they see as problematic with a piece of legislation, it may be amended, and then it starts the process all over again. And of course, to have the legal staff draft up amendments takes some time because you have 99 members asking for many things. And so that's also why you have a slower process in the first few weeks of session. But once the train gets to moving, you then see the rapid pace pick up. And that's when you also may see some bills being delayed because there may be a time restraint on when the committee can meet. And a bill that is very important to you may not get heard that particular day because another bill that is in front of it or two spaces in front of it may take up a lot of discussion. And as a result, that bill gets rolled to the next calendar. And so just want to make sure your listeners are familiar with those terms of a bill being rolled or a bill being postponed. And then there are some times when you get deeper into session where bills are being heard, but there's concern about what the bill may do. And sometimes these bills get sent to the ether of summer study that is not properly funded. And that's a kind way sometimes of members saying, we're not going to vote for the bill, but we're not going to vote it down. And we're going to give you an exit that is a bit softer than just a no. On the Senate side, that oftentimes is when a bill gets sent to what they call the general subcommittee of the Senate. And so if you're seeing on the website that a bill is general subbed in the Senate, that's a kind way for them saying, we're not going to vote it down, but we're going to give you a exit that is not just a no. But you also have the moments when a bill does not get a motion or a second. That's another way that a bill is not even heard. But then there are times when you do have an actual summer study where the bill is funded to be studied over the summer, and a committee will meet and get a deeper dive into what can be done for the piece of legislation. Then you may have sometimes a voluntary thing where a member in the first year of a 2-year cycle may actually roll the bill to the first calendar of the next year and give themselves time over the summer to talk to people about what the bill may do. But of course, then you come to where we are now, which is the second year of the General Assembly, and we're getting close to the end, which means that we have this thing called the flow mo, or the flow motion. Generally speaking, when we're in session, a particular bill that's heard in the subject matter committee has to lay over a certain number of hours before it can be heard in the next committee. So for example, if 10 Care Subcommittee meets on Tuesdays and Insurance Committee meets that same day later in the day, then normally if I get a bill passed out of 10 Care Subcommittee, I have to wait until that next week for the bill to be heard in the full Insurance Committee. What flow motion does is it says that all of those time restraints are taken off, and a bill that's heard in a subcommittee at 9 o'clock could be heard in the full committee at 3 o'clock on that same day. And now most of our subcommittees are closed, but we still have some subject matter committees where bills are being held and heard. and they need to be put into a posture where they can be heard in Finance, Ways, and Means, but also in the Calendar and Rules Committee on that same day or later on that week, the next day. And so what you'll see today is a flow motion being proposed for our 2 o'clock session on the House floor. If that passes, then more than likely what we'll have is on tomorrow, on Tuesday, legislation that is heard in Finance, Ways, and Means subcommittee, for example, can be passed out of the subcommittee and can be heard in the Finance, Ways, and Means full committee that afternoon and can be heard in Calendar and Rules the next day or that afternoon and can be on the House floor by Wednesday or Thursday. The benefit of that is it speeds up the process and allows us to work through this long list of bills that we have backlogged because of the House session gets and things get backlogged. Now, there's a particular thing about Finance, Ways, and Means Subcommittee that when they have a bill that they have before them that is a good bill that has passed the subject matter committee, but it has a fiscal impact or financial impact upon the state, maybe it reduces revenues or maybe it increases expenditures, that particular bill is put what we call behind the budget. Now, I told you earlier today that my freshman year, I was so excited. I had a bill that was behind the budget, and I thought that this was great because if it was behind the budget, that meant that it was going to be passed. And I was informed, no, Representative Love, when it's behind the budget, technically it has to be brought from behind the budget to be funded in the budget. And so you have a lot of bills that get put behind the budget and never get brought out and they never get voted upon. They're just behind the budget and the committee closes because the fiscal or financial impact upon the state is too large as deemed by the committee. It's not funded in the budget and it won't be passed. Members sometimes when they're working on legislation throughout the year may have conversations with the department or an agency or the governor's office to get what's called a funding letter. And a particular bill that was passed last week, a bill that dealt with eliminating the use or the possession of kratom, had a fiscal note. And the fiscal note dealt with possible imprisonment and possible other expenditures in the state that would be increased. Also, a reduction in the sales tax that was going to be acquired from the sale of kratom. But that sponsor of that bill had a funding letter from the governor that stated that the governor would include the cost of this legislation in the governor's budget. And so that member was able to present that funding letter to the Finance, Ways, and Means Committee to demonstrate that they had the funding for their bill taken care of, which meant it never went behind the budget. It went straight through Finance, Ways, and Means and got passed on the House floor. So in this period of time, what you have is a lot of members scrambling because they may be trying to figure out if their bill can be brought from behind the budget. This also has an impact upon what happens in the Senate because the Senate has what's called a sweeper. A sweeper means that they say that any bills on the Senate side that have a fiscal note of 50,000 or less gets swept into the budget. And so the Senate says if the bill has a fiscal impact of 50,000 or less, it's caught up in the sweeper. But that does not always mean that on the House side, we agree because the House does not have a sweeper. And so what one can do is try to make sure your bill is less than $50,000. So at least on the Senate side, you can get some goodwill to say they're going to sweep it up in their work and negotiate on the House side to talk to the Speaker, talk to the Chair of Finance, and talk to the committee to say, is it possible that this can be funded? So you may ask the question, well, what does it mean that it can be funded? Isn't the governor's budget locked and full? Well, there are several stages to the budget. You must remember that the original budget we all got came when the state of the state address was given. We all got our budget books, and that was the governor's first budget that was compiled from his budget hearings that he held in November and in December that dealt with departments and their requests, but also some initiatives that the governor wanted to have in his last year of his term. That's the first budget. So through the course of time after the first budget is presented, we have what's called the amended budget or the AA. This budget includes any bills that the governor may include in funding, but also includes any initiative that the governor may include since his initial budget. And that's when the legislature finds out what the amended budget looks like. That also gives us an indication of how much money is left for the legislature to include in its priorities, i.e., what bills we want to pass that have a fiscal impact, but also the budget amendments that members have submitted to our various committees in House Finance and in Senate Finance. So let's say that the governor's amended budget includes provisions that has left in the budget $10 million for the legislative initiatives. If the legislature deems that they really have 12 or $15 million worth of initiatives, what you may find is the governor's amended budget will be amended again by the legislature, because you must remember the budget is a bill. And now the budget is in the hands of the legislators. And we have the authority to go in and remove things in the governor's budget that we would deem might not need to be funded at a certain level, but could also free up money to be included in our legislative initiatives. Well, that includes bills that have a fiscal note, but it also includes budget amendments that members have submitted. And that's what we are now in the process of trying to figure out what's going to be funded. And then, of course, we also have this period of time toward the end of session where, even though the budget is almost finished, right, there still may be a piece that's not finished properly. And that is really when we get into the thick of passing the bonding issues, passing the appropriations bill, and then still having some things left out there that need to be resolved. And that's where we'll find ourselves in the last week of session.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the timing around the voucher bill. Will that be I mean, not that you have a crystal ball, but
Sure.
I'm curious if, because of the fiscal note with that, does that have to be determined first before the other bills that have a fiscal note are considered? Or are all of these in play at the same
Sure.
time?
Yes and no.
Okay.
They are all in play at the same time. However, the fiscal impact of the voucher expansion does weigh heavily into the determining factor of what we do with the money. Because if it's going to cost so much to expand the vouchers, what you may find is an amendment coming that reduces the amount from 35,000 to maybe 30,000 or 25,000, depending upon how much money needs to be freed up to actually do other initiatives outside of the voucher expansion. Because you must remember that, if I'm correct, baked into the original voucher legislation was an expansion anyway every year.
Right, the 5,000 per year.
This is on top of that. And so you may have some members who say, listen, it's going to expand anyway. There's no need to expand beyond that amount. Or, like I think Chairman Williams' amendment reduced it from 40,000 to 35,000. You may have members who say, listen, we can do without 5 more thousand, and it may go down to 30,000. It all depends on what's out there that needs to be funded this year. And also, you must this plays into the factor also, I believe. You have a new governor coming in November. No one knows what that governor's administration tone will be like when it comes to legislative initiatives. No one knows right now how much that new governor may fund in his or her budget that use up a good amount of the revenues from the General Assembly. Well, from the general fund, rather.
Totally get it.
Can you explain to us what happens when the Senate and the House bills don't match up? You kind of touched on it a little bit.
Great question. Yeah. So every bill must match exactly House version, Senate version. If there is a sentence that is different, right? So let's say the bill on the House side says that I'm sponsoring legislation that says that every third grader shall get a number 2 pencil when they go to school. And that's on the House side, and it passes, and we have the fiscal note that has the amount in there. And the Senate bill says that every other third grader shall get a pencil. Well, that's a lower fiscal note, right? It's not the same bill. So it has to match exactly. So let's say I pass the version that says every third grader. The Senate passed the bill that says every other third grader, because that's how they could get it passed over there. They wouldn't pass every third grader, but every other third grader. And so then we pass 2 different versions, right? So then we have a message calendar that you may hear about. You have a regular calendar, consent calendar, and a message calendar. So I passed the House version. the Senate receives the House version, and the Senate refuses to conform to the House version, and the Senate sends back a message saying that the Senate will not conform to the House versions, and sends a message back to the House saying, conform to our version. The House member, myself, would say that, and I did it last week, I said, I refuse
I heard that.
to recede from our actions. And I sent a message back to the Senate.
With everybody clapping.
Right, yeah. And so we
fight.
refuse to recede and send back to the Senate that we want you to conform to our version. So the Senate will send back a message saying, you know what? We refuse to recede from our requests from you. So now let's form a conference committee to work out the differences. That's one option. Second option would be we refuse to recede from our actions, and there will be no bill this year. And the bill just goes away. And so conference committees are formed, and you work out the differences. And in that conference committee, you may have a situation where we say, okay, you wanted every third grader to have a pencil. We want every other third grader. The argument that I may make is, yeah, but who determines who is every other third grader, right? And so we may say, okay, tell you what then. We'll say that every third grade class will get a box of pencils, but the teacher will determine who gets it. And I said, well, no, that's not fair, because how do we know we're going to fund that properly? So the Senate may say, well, let's work out our differences. And the Senate may say, you know what? We see your point. You want every third grader. We want every other third grader. Let's meet in the middle and see if we can figure out that if we do every other third grader, how that will be determined. And the third grader that does not get it will get one in the fourth grade. And that may be the decision we make to come to consensus and agree that that's what we shall do. And then once that's written up, the conference committee report comes out, and it becomes that the conference committee met and agreed upon this, that starting in fiscal year 2026, every other third grader will get a number 2 pencil when they start third grade, and those who did not will get one in the fourth grade. And that's what we decide to do, and that's the agreement. And then we adopt that and vote on that as the conference committee report.
In terms of timing, does the conference committee have to resolve those issues prior to session ending?
Yes, because if you don't resolve them before session ends, then there's no bill, because members don't get a chance to vote on that bill, and the governor cannot sign that bill. And so it does not become law.